Ethan was a man who seemed to have everything that the world admired. At just 32, he had built his own company from scratch, turning an idea into a thriving tech empire that made him a millionaire. People looked at him with admiration and respect whenever he walked into a room. His sharp suits, calm confidence, and successful lifestyle made him look untouchable, as if his life had no space for weakness or mistakes. Yet beneath the image of a confident CEO, there was a part of him that carried old wounds, memories that still bothered him when he was alone. Years ago, before his company grew into what it was, Ethan had been deeply in love with Clara. She was smart, ambitious, and full of charm. He had believed they were perfect together. They used to dream about a future side by side, building something beautiful as partners. But when times became difficult, when Ethan's company was just starting out and money was tight, Clara had chosen to walk away. She said she needed someone more established, someone who could give her a comfortable life immediately. Her leaving cut him deeply, not just because of love but because it made him feel as though he was not good enough. When his company finally succeeded, he thought the pain would fade. After all, success was supposed to heal everything. But in truth, the wound stayed. He told himself he didn't care anymore, yet whenever Clara's name came up in social circles, a shadow passed over his thoughts. It wasn't love anymore, it was pride. He wanted to show her that the man she left behind had become more than she ever imagined. One afternoon, Ethan's friend and business partner, Daniel, brought up the topic while they sat in Ethan's office overlooking the city. Daniel leaned back casually and said, "You heard Clara is going to be at the Global Business Gala next month, right? She's attending with her new husband. Big talk in the industry." Ethan froze for a moment but quickly masked his expression. "So what? People move on." Daniel gave him a knowing look. "You've moved on too, right? It's just, well, she'll be there, and people love gossip at these events. It might look strange if you show up alone. Everyone knows your history." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He tapped his fingers lightly on the desk, considering Daniel's words. The gala was one of the most important events of the year. CEOs, investors, and media outlets would all be there. It wasn't just a social event, it was a stage where reputations were made and strengthened. Ethan couldn't ignore the thought of Clara being there with her wealthy husband, looking as though she had everything, while people whispered about his past. The idea unsettled him. He didn't want pity. He didn't want people thinking she had made the better choice. He wanted to stand tall, to show that he was not only successful but also happy, admired, and desired. That evening, as he drove home through the glittering streets of the city, the thought kept circling in his mind. He had money, influence, and success, but what he didn't have was someone to stand by his side in that moment. The next day, while having lunch at a private club, Ethan casually mentioned the problem to Daniel again. Daniel smirked and said, "Why don't you just find someone to play the part? Doesn't have to be real. Just for the gala. People will see you're happy, and that's all that matters." At first, Ethan laughed at the suggestion. "You make it sound like hiring an actress." "Why not?" Daniel shrugged. "It's business, isn't it? You're not trying to fall in love. You're just protecting your image. Everyone plays roles at these events anyway." Though the idea sounded ridiculous, Ethan found himself thinking about it long after Daniel left. It would solve his problem neatly. A girlfriend, even a pretend one, would silence the whispers. Clara would see him with someone beautiful, confident, and warm. She would realize he hadn't been left broken, he had thrived. Still, Ethan wasn't sure. He had always prided himself on being authentic in business. Pretending in his personal life felt uncomfortable. Yet pride had its own voice, and it was loud. For days, he debated the idea in his head. The memory of Clara's leaving came back sharply, as though it had happened yesterday. He could still remember the look on her face when she said she wanted more, the sting of her words when she doubted his ability to succeed. Deep down, he wanted to prove her wrong not by speaking it out loud, but by showing her through his life. One evening, as he was attending a charity dinner, Ethan overheard a conversation that pushed him closer to the decision. A group of acquaintances were discussing the upcoming gala. One of them chuckled and said, "I wonder how awkward it'll be when Ethan runs into Clara again." Everyone knows the story. Though the words were not meant for him, Ethan caught them clearly. The quiet laughter that followed felt like a spark to his pride. He decided then and there that he would not walk into that gala alone. He would not give anyone the chance to pity him. The challenge now was finding someone suitable. It couldn't be just anyone. The woman had to carry herself with elegance, someone who could hold a conversation with investors, business leaders, and media without faltering. Someone who looked natural by his side, as though she belonged there. He needed someone who could make people believe the story without him saying a word. The solution came unexpectedly through his assistant, Claire. One morning, she mentioned her cousin Maya, a freelance designer who occasionally worked with creative projects for the company. Claire described her as independent, sharp, and unafraid to speak her mind. "She's not the type to be impressed by money," Claire added with a small smile. "Which is probably exactly the kind of person you need, Ethan." The idea intrigued him. If she wasn't easily swayed by wealth, then perhaps she would approach the arrangement as strictly business, without complication. Ethan asked Claire to set up a meeting. When Maya walked into his office the following week, Ethan was surprised. She was nothing like Clara or the women who usually surrounded business circles. She wasn't dressed in designer brands, nor did she carry herself with calculated elegance. Instead, she had a natural confidence, her dark hair tied back casually, her eyes sharp and observant. She greeted him politely but without awe, as though she saw him simply as another person, not as the millionaire CEO that others admired. Ethan explained the situation directly, careful to sound professional. Maya listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When he finished, she raised an eyebrow. "So, let me get this straight. You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend so your ex thinks you're doing fine?" The bluntness of her words made Ethan pause, then smile faintly. "That's one way to put it." "And what's in it for me?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "Compensation, of course," Ethan said. "And it's just for the gala. One evening. Nothing more." Maya tilted her head, studying him for a long moment. Finally, she nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." When she left, Ethan found himself strangely unsettled. He had expected her to be eager, maybe even flattered by the offer. Instead, she had treated it like a negotiation, with no sign of being impressed by who he was. Somehow, that made him even more curious about her. That night, as he stood by the window of his apartment looking out over the city lights, Ethan realized how unusual this path was for him. A fake relationship was not something he had ever imagined doing. But the thought of Clara, the whispers of others, and the sting of pride kept pushing him forward. The gala was coming soon, and if Maya agreed, everything could fall into place. Yet, deep inside, a quiet part of him wondered if this arrangement would truly be just business or if it would awaken feelings he didn't expect. A week passed before Ethan heard from Maya again. She had taken her time to consider his unusual proposal, which only made him more curious about what her answer would be. One afternoon, his assistant Claire walked into his office with a small smile. "She said yes," Claire announced simply, handing him a piece of paper with Maya's number on it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying the note. A strange mix of relief and curiosity stirred inside him. He had been half expecting Maya to reject the idea altogether, but the fact that she had agreed meant she was practical. She had probably weighed the pros and cons and decided it was worth it. For Ethan, it meant the first piece of his plan had fallen into place. Now came the harder part, making the arrangement look believable. That evening, Ethan called Maya. Her voice was calm and straightforward on the phone. "So," she said, "if we're going to do this, we need to make sure it looks real. People can tell when something is fake." Ethan was amused by her directness. "I agree. We'll need to spend some time together before the gala. At least enough so we don't look like strangers." Maya laughed lightly, and the sound was genuine, not polished or forced like the kind he often heard at business events. "All right. But let me be clear, I'm doing this for the arrangement, not because I want to be part of your world. So don't expect me to play the role outside of what we agreed." "Understood," Ethan said, though her words pricked at his pride in a way he couldn't explain. People usually wanted to be close to him. Maya was the first person who seemed determined not to be impressed. Their first meeting outside of the office was at a quiet cafe in the city. Ethan chose the place because it was tucked away, a spot where he could sit without attracting much attention. When Maya walked in, she looked effortlessly confident, wearing simple clothes that somehow suited her more than any designer outfit could. She slid into the seat across from him and greeted him with a nod. "So," she said, "tell me about your world. If I'm supposed to play the part of your girlfriend, I need to know enough to carry conversations." Ethan was taken aback. He had expected small talk, maybe even awkward silences, but Maya approached the situation like a professional preparing for a role. He spent the next hour telling her about the basics: his company, his colleagues, the investors who would be at the gala, even the kind of questions reporters might ask. Maya listened carefully, asking sharp questions that showed she was paying attention. "And Clara?" she asked finally. The name caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "She's the reason this arrangement exists. She'll be there with her husband. That's all you need to know." Maya raised an eyebrow. "But if I'm supposed to be your partner, I need to know how to act if she speaks to us. Do you want to ignore her, act polite, or pretend you're completely unaffected?" Ethan hadn't thought that far. He hesitated, then said, "Polite. But not overly friendly. I want it to look like I've moved on and I'm happy." Maya studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I can do that. But remember, the more natural we look, the less people will suspect anything." Over the next 2 weeks, they met several times. Sometimes it was for dinner, sometimes just a walk in the park, where they talked casually so they could learn each other's habits. Ethan found himself surprised by how easy it was to talk to Maya. Unlike others who often tried to impress him or flatter him, she simply spoke her mind. She told him stories about her work as a freelance designer, about the challenges of running her own projects, and about her love for sketching when she was stressed. Ethan, in return, found himself sharing things he rarely told anyone outside his close circle. He spoke about the struggles he had faced building his company, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. To his surprise, Maya didn't look at him with awe or pity. She simply listened, sometimes offering small comments that showed she understood. One evening, as they practiced what Ethan jokingly called their couple act, Maya said something that made him pause. "You know, Ethan, the problem with pretending is that you risk showing people the version of yourself you wish you could always be." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "When you're with me, you're relaxed. You're not giving speeches or trying to prove anything. If people see the side of you, they might believe it's real, not because of me, but because it's who you actually are when you're not performing." Her words lingered in his mind long after she left that night. Ethan realized she was right. With Maya, he didn't feel the need to act like the untouchable CEO. He could laugh, joke, and even show small vulnerabilities without worrying how it looked. It unsettled him because this wasn't part of the plan. The arrangement was supposed to be simple, professional. Yet Maya was already seeing sides of him that even Clara never truly knew. As the gala approached, Ethan made sure Maya had everything she needed. He arranged for a dress that would fit the occasion, but when he presented it to her, she shook her head. "I'll choose my own. I don't want to look like I'm dressed by your money." At first, Ethan felt slightly annoyed, but then he realized her independence was exactly what made her different. She didn't want to be seen as just an accessory. She wanted to walk beside him as an equal, even if the relationship was pretend. He respected that more than he expected. Meanwhile, word began to spread in his social circle that Ethan would not be arriving at the gala alone. Some of his colleagues teased him lightly, curious about the mysterious woman he had been spending time with. Ethan brushed off their comments, but inside, he wondered what they would think when they finally saw Maya. He knew she wouldn't fit the mold of what people expected, but maybe that was a good thing. On the night before the gala, Ethan and Maya met one last time to finalize their plan. They sat in his apartment, going over details. "We'll walk in together," Ethan explained. "Stay close, and don't be afraid of the cameras. Just be yourself." Maya smirked. "Your world thrives on appearances, Ethan. But don't worry, I'll play my part. Just remember, I'm not the one who has something to prove." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She was right. This arrangement wasn't really about her at all. It was about him, his pride, his past, his need to show Clara that he was not broken. Maya was simply the mirror reflecting the image he wanted the world to see. Yet as he watched her that evening, relaxed and comfortable even in his luxurious apartment, Ethan wondered if there was more to it. The line between what was real and what was pretend was starting to blur, and though he wouldn't admit it to himself, he was beginning to look forward to the gala for reasons beyond proving a point to his ex. The arrangement had started as business, but something about Maya made it feel different. She was not impressed by his wealth, not interested in his power. She simply saw him as Ethan, a man with strengths and flaws. And perhaps, without realizing it, that was exactly what he needed. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of anticipation that Ethan hadn't felt in years. The event was always a grand affair, held in a glass-walled ballroom that overlooked the river, with glittering chandeliers and red carpets that made it feel like the center of the world. For weeks, he had been preparing for this night, not just the business side, but the personal side too. And tonight, everything would finally play out. Ethan stood in front of the mirror in his apartment, adjusting his tie. His reflection stared back at him, sharp and polished, but his mind wasn't calm. For the first time in a long while, he felt uncertain. It wasn't the business deals or the media attention that unsettled him. It was the thought of seeing Clara again, face to face, after all these years. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Maya was standing there. She wore a sleek midnight blue dress that she had chosen herself, one that wasn't overly glamorous but elegant in a way that suited her perfectly. She looked confident yet natural, and something about the way she carried herself made Ethan pause for a moment longer than he intended. "You clean up well," Maya said lightly, giving him a small smile. "You too," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. They drove together to the gala, the quiet hum of the car filling the silence between their conversations. Ethan explained a few last-minute details: who they might meet, the layout of the ballroom, but Maya simply nodded, calm and collected. She didn't seem nervous at all, and that steadiness made Ethan feel more grounded. When they arrived, flashes from cameras greeted them as soon as they stepped out. The red carpet was lined with photographers, and voices called out Ethan's name. For years, he had walked these carpets alone, his success making headlines without the warmth of someone beside him. But tonight, Maya was there, her arm linked with his. She didn't falter under the attention, instead, she smiled with ease, as though she had done this 100 times before. Inside, the ballroom glittered with lights and chatter. People turned their heads as Ethan and Maya entered, whispers starting almost immediately. Ethan caught glimpses of surprised faces, colleagues raising their eyebrows, and even a few smiles of approval. It was exactly what he had wanted to make a statement without saying a word. But the moment he had been both dreading and expecting came sooner than he thought. Across the room, he saw Clara. She looked just as polished as ever, dressed in a gown that shimmered under the lights, her husband standing tall beside her. For a brief second, their eyes met. Clara's expression didn't reveal much, just a flicker of surprise before she masked it with a smile. Maya leaned closer and whispered, "Is that her?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "Well," Maya added with a small smirk, "she doesn't look too happy to see you smiling." Ethan almost laughed at the comment, but he caught himself. Instead, he guided Maya toward a group of investors who greeted him warmly. She slipped naturally into conversation, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently. To Ethan's surprise, she didn't just stand beside him silently, she engaged, joked lightly, and even made people laugh. The investors seemed charmed by her presence, and Ethan found himself feeling proud, even though it was all supposed to be an act. As the evening continued, Maya moved through the crowd with ease. Every now and then, she glanced at Ethan to make sure he was comfortable, but otherwise, she played her role perfectly. Yet for Ethan, something began to shift. Watching her interact with others, seeing how effortlessly she fit into a world that wasn't her own, stirred feelings he hadn't expected. She wasn't just pretending, she was making the night easier for him in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the real test came when Clara finally approached. She walked up with her husband, her smile polite but sharp. "Ethan," she said smoothly, "it's been a long time." Ethan nodded, his tone calm. "It has. And this must be," Clara turned her eyes to Maya, her curiosity thinly veiled. "Maya," Ethan introduced, placing a hand gently at the small of Maya's back. "My girlfriend." Maya extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's nice to meet you." Clara shook it, her eyes narrowing just slightly as though she were trying to figure out the truth behind the picture. For a moment, there was silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken history. But Maya broke it with a light laugh, making a small comment about the event that shifted the tension into polite conversation. Ethan couldn't help but admire how gracefully she handled the moment. As Clara and her husband walked away, Maya leaned closer and whispered, "She still cares. Otherwise, she wouldn't have looked at me like that." Ethan glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "She was comparing herself to me," Maya replied simply. "And that means she hasn't fully let go." The thought stayed with Ethan for the rest of the night. Once, he would have been desperate for Clara's attention, desperate to prove something to her. But now, standing beside Maya, he realized he didn't feel that desperation anymore. Instead, he felt something different, something calmer, deeper, and far less complicated. Later in the evening, as they took a short break by the balcony, Ethan finally voiced the thought that had been building. "You've done more than I expected tonight." Maya looked at him curiously. "More?" "You made people believe," Ethan said. "Not just because you played the role well, but because you were real. You were yourself, and that was enough." Maya tilted her head, smiling faintly. "I told you. Pretending only works if there's some truth to it." The words hit him harder than he expected. Was there truth here? Was there something beyond the arrangement? He didn't want to admit it, but the line between acting and reality was blurring fast. As the night drew to an end, they left the ballroom together, still arm in arm. The cameras flashed once more as they stepped into the car. Inside, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, heavy with unspoken emotions. Maya finally broke it with a quiet laugh. "Well, if nothing else, you certainly got what you wanted tonight." People will talk about us for weeks. Ethan turned his head toward her, his expression softer than he intended. Maybe I got more than I wanted. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't part of the act, wasn't part of the deal. It was something real, something Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as he lay awake in his apartment, Ethan thought about the gala, about Clara's face when she saw him, and about the way Maya had stood by his side without fear. He realized that the evening hadn't been about proving himself to Clara anymore. It had become about something else, something he didn't yet fully understand, but something that mattered far more than pride. The days following the gala were filled with endless chatter in the business world. Articles appeared online with photos of Ethan and Maya, calling them a power couple, praising how natural they looked together. Investors sent him congratulatory messages, some joking about finally settling down, while others were curious about Maya. For Ethan, it was strange to read all of it. He had expected the plan to work, but he hadn't expected the response to be so overwhelming. Everywhere he went, people wanted to know more about Maya. She had made an impression, not just because of her beauty, but because she carried herself differently. She wasn't pretending to be part of that glittering world, she had simply been herself, and somehow, that had been enough to win everyone over. Ethan told himself it was all going exactly as planned. The whispers about Clara had vanished. No one looked at him with pity anymore. Instead, they admired him more than ever. Yet inside, he couldn't ignore the fact that something had changed. What was supposed to be a simple arrangement was becoming complicated, because the more time he spent with Maya, the harder it became to see her as just someone playing a part. A week after the gala, Clara requested a private meeting. Ethan received the message through a mutual acquaintance, and though part of him wanted to ignore it, another part was curious. They met in a quiet corner of a hotel cafe, away from the cameras and the noise of the world. Clara looked almost the same as before, elegant, polished, confident. Yet when she spoke, there was a softness in her voice that hadn't been there years ago. "You've changed," she said, studying him. "You seem different. Happier." Ethan kept his tone steady. "I am. Life has been good." Clara hesitated, then leaned closer. "You know, I sometimes wonder if I made a mistake back then." Her words caught him off guard. For a moment, old memories stirred the pain of her leaving, the nights he had doubted himself. Years ago, those words would have been everything he wanted to hear. He would have jumped at the chance to fix what they had lost. But now, sitting across from her, he realized something surprising. He didn't feel the same. "You made the choice that felt right for you at the time," Ethan replied calmly. "I don't hold it against you anymore." Clara's eyes searched his face, as though trying to read whether he truly meant it. Then she smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "She's different from the women I thought you'd end up with. But maybe that's a good thing." When he left that cafe, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. Clara's words no longer had power over him. The chains of the past, the pride and anger that had driven him into this arrangement, seemed weaker. What weighed on his mind now wasn't Clara, it was Maya. That evening, he invited Maya over for dinner at his apartment. It was supposed to be a casual thank you, but he found himself putting more thought into it than he wanted to admit. He even cooked, something he rarely did, and when Maya walked in, she laughed softly at the sight of him in the kitchen. "I didn't expect the CEO of a tech company to know how to use a frying pan," she teased. "I'm full of surprises," he replied, smiling despite himself. They ate together, the conversation flowing easily as always. Maya teased him about the articles, calling them the perfect couple, and Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in months. Yet as the evening went on, a quiet tension built between them, something unspoken, something neither of them dared to name. At one point, Maya leaned back in her chair, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, Ethan, when I agreed to this, I thought it would just be one night. But now it feels like more. People actually believe it. Doesn't that scare you? He met her gaze and answered honestly. What scares me is how real it feels sometimes. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Maya looked away, as if unsure how to respond. Ethan didn't push her. Instead, he poured them both another glass of wine and changed the subject, though the weight of what he had said lingered. In the following days, things became more complicated. People began inviting Ethan and Maya to events as a couple. Some of his business partners insisted on meeting her, curious about the woman who had captured his attention. At first, Maya resisted, reminding him that their agreement was only for the gala. But somehow, she kept saying yes. The more they appeared together, the more natural it felt. Ethan began to notice little things about her: the way she tapped her fingers when she was thinking, the spark in her eyes when she laughed, the quiet determination she had when she spoke about her own work. These were not things he had ever looked for in someone before, but now they seemed to matter more than anything else. One evening, after attending another dinner together, Ethan drove Maya home. The city lights shimmered outside the car windows, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "Ethan, do you ever wonder what happens when this ends?" she asked softly. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we started this with an agreement. It was supposed to be temporary. But now," she trailed off, her voice uncertain. Ethan glanced at her, his chest tightening. He wanted to tell her that he didn't want it to end, that he had stopped thinking of it as pretend. But fear held him back. He was afraid of ruining what they had, afraid that if he spoke too soon, she might pull away completely. Instead, he simply said, "We'll figure it out." The words didn't satisfy either of them, but for now, it was enough. Everything reached a turning point a few days later at a charity auction. Ethan and Maya attended together, as usual, but this time Clara was there too. During the evening, Clara found a way to speak to Ethan privately, pulling him aside while Maya was engaged in conversation with others. "You know," Clara said quietly, "I wasn't lying when I said I wondered if I made a mistake. If you wanted, we could try again. Things are different now." Ethan looked at her, the woman who had once been the center of his world. But as he listened, his heart wasn't racing with hope, it was steady, calm. Because all he could think about was Maya, standing just across the room, laughing genuinely in a way Clara never had. "I don't want that," Ethan said firmly. "I've moved on. And for the first time, I think I know what happiness really feels like." When he walked back to Maya, Clara's expression lingered in his mind, but not with regret, only with clarity. The past no longer controlled him. The future was standing right in front of him. Later that night, Ethan finally allowed himself to be honest. As he walked Maya to her door, he stopped, his voice low but steady. "Maya, I need you to know something. When we started this, it was supposed to be a game. Just an arrangement. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like that for me. Being with you doesn't feel like pretending anymore." Maya froze, her eyes wide. For a moment, Ethan feared he had said too much. But then, slowly, she smiled, though her voice trembled slightly when she replied. "I was afraid you'd never say it. Because it hasn't felt like pretending for me either." The world seemed to pause around them in that moment. The arrangement that had begun with pride and a need for revenge had led them somewhere neither of them had expected, into something real, something fragile, and something worth holding on to. Life felt different after that night. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't carrying the weight of his past or worrying about how others saw him. His heart felt lighter, his mind calmer, and his days brighter. What had started as a plan to save his pride had turned into something far more meaningful. He and Maya had crossed a line, no longer pretending, no longer hiding behind an arrangement. They were something real now, something neither of them had expected but both wanted to hold on to. At first, they moved carefully, testing what this new reality meant. They still went to events together, but now there was no act behind their smiles. When Ethan reached for her hand, it wasn't to convince others, it was because he truly wanted to feel her fingers laced with his. When Maya laughed at his side, it wasn't part of a performance, it was genuine, and every time, it filled Ethan with warmth. People noticed the difference too. Friends and colleagues commented on how natural they looked together, how Ethan seemed happier than he had in years. Investors teased him about being settled, while others praised Maya for being so grounded despite the attention. What amused Ethan most was that no one suspected it had all started as a plan. To the outside world, they were simply a couple who fit together perfectly. But real relationships were never as simple as appearances. With honesty came challenges. Ethan had spent years building walls around himself, and lowering them wasn't easy. Maya, on the other hand, was fiercely independent. She was used to standing on her own, making her own choices, and living life by her rules. Being with someone as powerful and busy as Ethan required adjustments from her too. One evening, they sat together on Maya's small apartment balcony. The city stretched out before them, lights flickering like stars, and the sound of distant traffic hummed in the background. Maya sipped her tea while Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her quietly. "You know," Maya said after a pause, "sometimes I worry about us." Ethan frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because your life is big. Everywhere you go, people watch you. They expect things from you. And me, I'm not used to that. I like simple things. I like being able to walk down the street without cameras." She gave him a small smile. "I don't want to lose myself in your world." Her words struck Ethan deeply. He reached for her hand, his voice steady but gentle. "I don't want you to lose yourself either. That's not what I want at all. I don't need you to change for me. I just want you exactly as you are." Maya studied his face, searching for sincerity. When she saw it, her smile softened, and she squeezed his hand. "Then maybe we'll be okay." That night was a turning point. They decided that if their relationship was going to last, it couldn't be about Ethan pulling Maya into his world or Maya trying to adjust to his pace. It had to be about building something together, where both of them could stay true to who they were. And so, slowly, they learned how to balance their lives. Maya continued her freelance design work, even turning down projects that were offered to her just because of her connection to Ethan. She wanted her career to remain hers, built on her own talent. Ethan respected that, even though some people in his circle didn't understand why she refused easy opportunities. For Ethan, the change came in how he prioritized his time. He had always been consumed by work, often spending late nights at the office, chasing the next big deal. But with Maya, he began to step back. He still worked hard, his company was his life's work, but he learned to leave the office earlier sometimes, to share dinners, walks, or quiet evenings with her. These small moments, he realized, were just as valuable as any business success. Months passed, and their bond only grew stronger. There were challenges, arguments about schedules, misunderstandings about priorities, moments of doubt when the pressures of their different worlds clashed. But unlike his past with Clara, this time Ethan faced those moments with honesty. He didn't hide his feelings or pretend everything was fine. Maya didn't walk away when things got difficult either. Instead, they learned to talk through it, to listen, to compromise. One of the most memorable moments came when Maya invited Ethan to meet her parents. They lived in a quiet town outside the city, far removed from the world of business galas and flashing cameras. Ethan felt strangely nervous as they drove there, more nervous than he had been for any investor meeting. Maya's parents welcomed him warmly, though with cautious curiosity. At dinner, her father asked him questions about his company, while her mother wanted to know if he cooked more often than the one meal Maya had told her about. Ethan laughed, answering honestly, and slowly, the tension faded. By the end of the night, he found himself sitting with Maya's father on the porch, talking about life and choices, while Maya smiled quietly from inside. Later, as they drove back to the city, Maya leaned against him and whispered, "They like you." Ethan smiled, relief washing over him. "That's good. Because I like their daughter more than I ever expected to." It was in that moment that Ethan knew this was no longer just a relationship built on chance or circumstance. It was something he wanted to last. The final test came unexpectedly. At another business event, Clara approached him again, this time alone. Her expression was softer than before, almost regretful. "You really are happy, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "I am." Clara gave a small, sad smile. "I hope she knows how lucky she is." Ethan didn't reply. He didn't feel the need to explain or prove anything anymore. The past was behind him, and for the first time, he felt completely free from it. That night, as he walked with Maya under the glow of city lights, he realized something important. The arrangement had started out as a way to protect his pride, to prove something to his ex. But it had ended with something he hadn't even dared to dream of: love that was real, raw, and strong enough to withstand the weight of both their worlds. Ethan stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, turning to face Maya. She looked at him curiously, her hair brushing lightly against her shoulders as the night breeze played with it. "Maya," he said, his voice low but certain, "I know how we started. And I know it wasn't the most honest beginning. But I don't care about that anymore. What matters to me now is where we are and where we're going. I don't want this to be temporary. I want it to be forever." Maya's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching as she realized what he meant. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, one that lit up her entire expression. "Forever sounds good to me." Ethan pulled her close, holding her tightly as the world moved on around them. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was proving anything to anyone. He wasn't acting, he wasn't pretending. He was simply living and loving with all of his heart. The story that had begun as a strategy to impress an ex had transformed into something genuine. And in that truth, Ethan finally found the happiness he had been searching for all along.